She handed me the cardboard box like she was returning something she'd borrowed and never wanted in the first place. No eye contact. Just a slight lift at the corner of her mouth, the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. And then she turned and walked back into the house that used to feel like home every time I knocked on that door. That's all of it, Renee said without looking back. Everything the police released. I stood on the porch of my son's house, holding a box that weighed maybe 8 pounds. My son, Marcus, had been missing for 14 months. They'd found his car abandoned on the shoulder of Route 9 outside of Knoxville, driver's door open, coffee still in the cup holder. No note, no sign of struggle, no body, just gone. The case was technically still open, but I knew what the detectives thought. I could see it in the way they'd stopped returning my calls after the first 6 months. I drove home with the box on the passenger seat and didn't open it until I'd made a pot of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table where Marcus used to do his homework 30 years ago. Inside were the things that apparently constituted the remnants of a man's daily life. His wallet, emptied of cash but still holding his library card, and an old photo of the two of us fishing at Norris Lake the summer he turned 12. His phone, dead and cracked across the screen. A pocket knife I'd given him for his 30th birthday. A paperback novel with the spine broken at page 211, a bookmark still holding his place. And at the bottom, folded into a square so small it had slipped beneath everything else, his old canvas work jacket. The dark green one with the split seam on the left shoulder that I'd offered to sew for him at least a dozen times. He always said he'd get around to it. I held the jacket for a long time. It still smelled faintly like him, motor oil and that cedar soap he'd used since college. I pressed it against my face and just breathed, which is not something a 63-year-old man from East Tennessee expects to find himself doing on a Tuesday morning. But grief makes strangers of us all. I almost folded it back into the box. I almost didn't check the pockets. I'm not sure what made me reach inside. Maybe force of habit. When Marcus was a boy, I was always finding things in his jacket pockets before I ran the laundry. Rocks he thought were interesting. Pieces of string. Once, a live crawdad wrapped in a paper towel. Old habits die hard when you're a father, I suppose. My fingers found something in the inside breast pocket. A small envelope, the kind that comes with a bouquet of flowers. My name was written on the front in Marcus's handwriting. Just one word. Dad. I set it on the table and stared at it for what must have been 5 full minutes before I could make myself open it. Inside was a folded index card. 4 lines in Marcus's neat block print. Dad, if you're reading this, I need you to trust me. Go to the Cedar Hill Self-Storage on Mabry Hood Road. Unit 114. Combination. Your birthday, no spaces. Don't tell Renee. Don't tell anyone. Please. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading it. I read it 3 more times to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. The handwriting was his. The reference to my birthday, October 4th, 1961, was something only Marcus would know to use. And the words "Don't tell Renee" were underlined twice, firmly enough that the pen had nearly gone through the card. I left the house 20 minutes later. Cedar Hills Self-Storage was about 11 miles from my house, tucked behind a tire shop on a stretch of Mabry Hood Road. I didn't have much reason to travel. I'd driven past it 100 times without ever really noticing it, the kind of place that exists quietly at the edge of your life. I found Unit 114 near the back of the second row. Orange roll-up door, combination padlock, a small weatherproof sticker in the corner of the frame that said paid through June 2026. Someone had paid that unit forward. Someone had planned for it to be there when I arrived. My birthday, 10041961. The lock opened. I cannot fully describe what it felt like to stand in the doorway of that storage unit and understand that my son had been in that space, had arranged what was inside it, had thought about me standing exactly where I was standing. It felt like receiving a letter from someone you'd given up on ever hearing from again. The unit wasn't large, maybe 10 by 10. Along the left wall, stacked neatly, were 7 banker's boxes, each one labeled in Marcus's handwriting. In the center of the floor sat a folding lawn chair, and taped to the inside of the door at eye level, in a large Ziploc bag, was a letter. 12 pages, front and back, in Marcus's handwriting. A pen was clipped to the top. The first line read, "Dad, I am alive. I am safe. I am so sorry." I sat down in that lawn chair and I read every word. Marcus had met Renee Calloway 6 years earlier at a project management conference in Nashville. He was running his own commercial contracting company by then, the one he and I had built together from the ground up over 8 years, starting with nothing but a used pickup truck and a list of phone numbers. By the time they married, the company was worth just under $4 million. I'd stepped back from the day-to-day by then, proud of what he'd built, happy to consult when he needed me and stay out of his way when he didn't. What I didn't know, what Marcus had only begun to understand himself in the months before he disappeared, was that Renee had been systematically moving company assets since their second year of marriage. Small transfers at first, the kind that looked like normal business expenses. Then larger ones, more frequent, routed through a shell company registered in Nevada under her brother Derek's name. By the time Marcus discovered what was happening, nearly $900,000 had been redirected. He'd confronted her. He told her in the letter that he'd been calm about it, that he'd wanted to believe there was an explanation, that he'd loved her and trusted her and hadn't wanted to see what was directly in front of him. Her response had been to smile, that same slight smile I'd seen on her porch, and tell him to be very careful about what he decided to do next. 2 days later, someone had broken into Marcus's office and wiped his computer. The backup drive was gone. His business attorney received an anonymous tip that Marcus had been falsifying invoices for 3 years. A woman Marcus had never met filed a complaint with the county, claiming he'd defrauded her elderly mother out of $40,000 on a roofing job that was never completed. The complaint made the local paper. Then Marcus got a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end told him very clearly that if he pursued the matter, his father would be hurt. That was me. I was the leverage. In the letter, Marcus wrote that he had sat in his truck for 2 hours after that phone call, trying to figure out what to do. He was a careful man, always had been. He didn't panic. He started planning. He went to the police, but with the falsified evidence against him already circulating, he wasn't sure how far that would get him. He reached out quietly to a former colleague who dealt with financial fraud litigation. He began gathering everything he could, and then he realized the only way to keep me safe and to give himself the time and freedom to build a real case was to disappear. He staged the abandoned car on Route 9 himself, drove it out there, left it unlocked, walked 3 miles to where a friend named Carl was waiting in a pickup. Carl was the only person who knew the truth, a man Marcus had known since the 7th grade and trusted more than anyone on earth. Carl drove him to a rented room in Chattanooga, under a name the letter didn't include, for my protection. The banker's boxes contained copies of everything: bank transfer records, shell company filings, emails between Renee and Derek that Marcus had recovered from a cloud backup they didn't know he had access to, invoices that had been altered, a timeline painstakingly assembled going back 4 years, a USB drive taped to the inside lid of the third box, labeled with a small piece of masking tape, audio R+D, March conversations. The last page of the letter was the one that broke me completely. Dad, I know I put you through something unforgivable by letting you believe I was gone. I have thought about that every single day. I have picked up the phone 100 times. I want you to know that the only reason I could do this, the only thing that made it possible to get out of bed every morning in that rented room and keep working, was knowing that you raised me to finish what I started. You taught me that. You taught me that if something matters, you see it through, no matter how long it takes. This matters. You matter. I will explain everything in person. I love you. Please trust me a little longer. I sat in that lawn chair for a long time after I finished reading. The kind of stillness that isn't peace. Exactly. But is the thing that comes just before it, when you've finally stopped bracing for the blow and understood that what hit you wasn't what you thought it was. Then I took the USB drive and the letter and drove to the office of a man named Raymond Stills, who had been the attorney for my contracting company for 22 years, and who I trusted with my life. Raymond read the letter, examined the drive, and looked at me across his desk with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Walter, he said, we need to make some calls. What followed over the next 3 weeks is difficult to describe in a linear way, because it didn't feel linear at the time. It felt like standing in the middle of a river watching the current rearrange itself around you. Raymond connected us with a federal prosecutor he knew from a financial crimes case several years back. The audio files on that USB drive turned out to be the kind of evidence that makes prosecutors sit forward in their chairs. Renee and Derek had been thorough in their theft, but they had been careless in their conversations. People who believe they've already won tend to get careless. The falsified complaint against Marcus was traced back to a woman Derek had paid $800 to sign a document she barely read. The business attorney who'd received the anonymous tip was interviewed and provided phone records. The shell company in Nevada unraveled in a way that suggested neither Renee nor Derek had consulted anyone who actually understood corporate law. I was not supposed to know exactly when it happened. Raymond had asked me to stay home and wait. I did not stay home. I was parked on the street 2 blocks from Marcus's house, Renee's house now, as she'd been calling it on a cold Thursday morning when I saw the 2 federal vehicles turn onto the street. I watched from a distance. I watched Renee come to the door in her robe, and I watched her face change when she understood what was happening. The slight smile was gone. I will not pretend I felt nothing watching it disappear. Raymond called me 4 minutes later. "It's done," he said. "You should go home, Walter. There's someone who wants to call you." My phone rang 12 minutes after I got home. The number was blocked. "Dad?" I had promised myself I would hold it together. I am not a man who cries easily. I built a business with my hands and raised a son largely on my own after his mother passed, and I have always believed that steadiness is one of the few real gifts you can give the people who depend on you. I did not hold it together. We talked for 47 minutes. Marcus was in Chattanooga, same place he'd been for most of the 14 months. He'd lost 20 pounds and grown a beard that he said made him look like a man who'd given up on himself, which made me laugh for the first time in longer than I could remember. He'd been working with Raymond and the federal prosecutor remotely for 3 weeks by then, submitting documents, answering questions. He'd known the arrest was coming. He'd been counting down the days. He drove to my house the following Saturday morning. I was standing on the front porch when his rental car turned into the driveway. I had been standing there for 20 minutes because I couldn't make myself sit down and wait inside. When he got out of the car, I saw him clearly for the first time in over a year, thinner than I remembered, older around the eyes. The beard exactly as bad as he'd described, and I walked down those porch steps faster than a 63-year-old man probably should. He met me in the middle of the driveway. I don't know how long we stood there. Long enough that the neighbor's dog started barking, and neither of us moved. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said into my shoulder. "I am so sorry." "Hush," I told him. "You're here. There are things I've turned over in the months since then, questions I've sat with at the kitchen table late at night. Whether he could have found another way, whether the weight of those 14 months, the not knowing, the grief that had no clean shape to it because there was no body, no certainty, just absence, whether any outcome justified that. Marcus and I have talked about it honestly, more than once. He doesn't ask me to say it was the right call. He says he made the best decision he could with what he knew and what he feared, and that he would carry the cost of it for the rest of his life. I believe him. I also believe that a man who is capable of that kind of remorse is a man who was raised right, and I'll take some credit for that if it's being offered. Renee and Derek were both federally charged. The financial fraud case was substantial enough that their attorneys apparently advised them early on that a trial would not go well. The woman who'd signed the false complaint cooperated with investigators. The shell company records spoke for themselves. I am not a man who takes pleasure in other people's suffering, but I will tell you honestly that when Raymond called me with the sentencing outcomes, I sat down at that kitchen table and said a quiet thank you to whatever it is in this universe that occasionally, imperfectly, rights the things that have been wronged. Marcus's company is being rebuilt. Some clients had moved on. That was unavoidable. 14 months is a long time in the contracting world, but more stayed than he expected. Word travels in this industry, and the full story traveled too. His attorney issued a statement. The local paper, to their credit, ran a follow-up piece that carried more weight than the original. Carl, his old friend, drove up from Chattanooga the week Marcus came home, and the 3 of us sat on my back porch until midnight, which is something I haven't done in years. The canvas work jacket with the split seam is hanging on a hook by my back door. I've told Marcus I'll sew it for him whenever he's ready. He keeps saying he'll get around to it. I think maybe neither of us actually wants it sewn. There's something about a thing staying broken in a way that reminds you what it led you to. A small rip in a jacket that turned out to be the thread I needed to pull. I think about the morning I almost put that jacket back in the box without checking the pockets. I think about it more than I probably should. How many times in a life do we nearly miss the thing that was left there specifically for us to find? How many small gestures of love do we walk right past because we're moving too fast, or too numb, or too certain we already know what's inside? My son knew me well enough to know I'd check the pockets. He'd watched me do it his whole childhood. He built his lifeline out of the small, ordinary thing he trusted me to do. I checked the pockets. That was all it took. If there's anything this year taught me, it's that love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it folds itself into an index card and waits in the dark for you to find it. Sometimes it looks like an abandoned car on a highway shoulder and an 8-pound cardboard box handed over without eye contact. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones working quietly in the background, doing things you won't understand until later, trusting that you raised them well enough to follow where they're pointing. Marcus is coming for dinner on Sunday. He's bringing Carl. I'm making the chili I used to make every October when he was growing up, the one with the cornbread on the side that he always ate 3 pieces of even when he said he was full. I bought the ingredients yesterday. I think I'll check the pockets of every jacket in this house from now on, just in case. You never know what someone who loves you might have left there. Drop your location in the comments below and tell me, have you ever nearly missed something that turned out to change everything? I'd love to hear your story.